Russia is experiencing the worst days in its history. The overconfident Russian army is about to fall apart. The Russian army is completely out of order. If the problems in the army are not solved, Russia may soon be forced to withdraw completely from Ukraine. So how did the Russian army become like this? What is happening in Russia? To answer these questions, we need to take a closer look at the structure of the Russian army. First, let us take a look at the available data. The Russian army has over 1 million active and 2 million reserve personnel. This makes Russia the second largest military power in the world. However, it has recently become clear that the larger size of the Russian army does not make it a stronger army. It is very difficult to control such a large number of soldiers. There are many reasons for this. First, there are many mercenaries in the Russian army. There is constant tension between the mercenaries in the Russian army and the conscripted citizens. Mercenaries have many privileges, especially the Wagner Group, to which these soldiers belong, is one of the most important institutions that deepen the crisis. The Wagner Group is one of the biggest companies in Russia. Prigozhin, the head of the company, had a deep influence on Russian politics. That's why Wagner Group soldiers do not listen to the orders of Russian commanders and cause many problems within the army. Soldiers of the Wagner Group do not participate in any of the operations in risky areas. These areas are manned by Russian soldiers who were recruited by force. Russian soldiers are very angry with the commanders and the Wagner Group because of this situation. On the other hand, most officers in the Russian army have not been paid for months. However, the soldiers of the Wagner Group always receive a high amount of payment. There is a crisis between the Russian officers and the soldiers of the Wagner Group due to this problem. Moreover, many of the soldiers in the Russian army come from different ethnic backgrounds. There are 22 autonomous republics in the Russian Federation. These regions are mostly populated by minorities. Citizens living in minority regions are forcibly recruited into the army. This situation causes the crisis in the Russian army to increase. One of the biggest problems in Russia is racism. As the Russian army brings together soldiers of many different races, racism rises to higher levels. The tension between Russian commanders and soldiers from minority regions is increasing day by day. After this attitude of Russian commanders, many revolts started in the Russian army. Especially soldiers from Chechnya and Dagestan caused great damage to the Russian army. Russia dismissed the commanders, who could not suppress these rebellions. As a result of the dismissal of the commanders, the hierarchical order in the Russian army was severely damaged. But these were not the main problems in the Russian army. The Russian army is struggling with a much bigger crisis. Russian soldiers have started to surrender en masse. After this move of the Russian soldiers, the Kremlin was helpless. So why are Russian soldiers surrendering? There are dozens of reasons for the surrender of Russian troops. But one thing is certain, it is because of the great success of the Ukrainian army. Russian troops are suffering a heavy defeat in Ukraine. The death toll in the Russian army is close to 100,000. Fear is growing among Russian soldiers because of these heavy losses. Russian soldiers don't believe they can win this war, so they plan to end this war by surrendering. And the soldiers in the Russian army know that their lives are not cared for. Russian soldiers are being sent to die in Ukraine. Russian soldiers are saying, "We don't want to die for Putin." Anti-war protesters in Russia are also supporting this rebellion. Russian citizens are saying, "This is Putin's war, not ours." The crisis in the Russian army do not end there. Having suffered a major defeat in Ukraine, Russia has sent troops and militants from many other regions to the region. Armed groups that Russia has supported in Syria for years have been sent to Ukraine. In addition, many militants from Afghanistan and Iran are fighting in this region. None of these fighters have professional army training. That's why they cannot conduct regular operations and coordinate in a professional manner. This disrupts the entire organization of the Russian army. There are terrorist groups and mercenaries in the Russian army at the same time. With so many different groups, a new problem arises in the Russian army every day. There have been dozens of reports of Russian soldiers trying to escape from the army. But most of the soldiers who fled the war were captured by the Russian army. The deserters had nowhere to go. Russian soldiers found an interesting solution. An incident in the Kherson region completely changed the course of the war. After the increased operations of the Ukrainian army, soldiers at a Russian base in Kherson raised a white flag and surrendered. The surrendered soldiers were taken to a center by the Ukrainian army. They were identified and then given new clothes and hot meals. A special dormitory was prepared for the surrendered Russian soldiers. This made the soldiers very happy. The Russian soldiers who surrendered wanted to share their experiences with their friends serving in the army. The Russian soldiers made a video and told everything they went through. In this video, a call was made for other Russian soldiers to surrender as well. This video attracted great attention in the Russian army in a short time. Speaking in the video, Russian soldiers said they were treated very well here. The soldiers said, "Everything here is better than in the Russian army. They give us hot food, new clothes and comfortable beds. Moreover, our safety is not in danger." This speech by the Russian soldier was soon shared in Telegram groups. Most of the soldiers in the Russian army decided to surrender. Immediately after this event, Russian soldiers began to surrender in many bases. In this way, the Ukrainian army managed to liberate many towns without any fighting. The surrender of Russian soldiers raising the white flag caused a crisis in the Russian army. Russian commanders tried many methods to prevent the soldiers from surrendering, but without success. Many Russian commanders were then dismissed. This situation increased the tension in the Russian army. By surrendering, Russian soldiers have done enormous damage to Russia's reputation. The Russian government is making great efforts to prevent the soldiers from surrendering. The Russian press is not publishing any footage of the soldiers surrendering. Putin is allegedly very angry about this. The Ukrainian government is implementing very determined policies on this issue. Images of Russian soldiers surrendering are frequently shared. The Ukrainian army uses drones to record the moments when Russian soldiers surrender. These images are shared on social media accounts of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. The Putin administration was making a great effort to prevent these images, but an incident in Ukraine thwarted all Putin's plans. This interesting story changed the course of the war. Surrendered Russian soldiers met with the mothers of soldiers serving in the Ukrainian army. The mothers of the soldiers served the Russian soldiers the food they cooked. Ukrainian mothers thanked the surrendered soldiers for not continuing this war. At this moment, a Russian soldier became very emotional and started to cry. The Ukrainian mother hugged the Russian soldier and began to console him. The Russian soldier said that he wanted to go home and that this war had to end. Then the Ukrainian mother did something that surprised everyone. The Ukrainian mother decided to make a video call to the Russian soldier's mother. She asked the Russian soldier for his mother's phone number. Thanks to this call, the soldier who saw his mother experienced great joy. There was a very emotional conversation between the Ukrainian mother and the Russian mother. This conversation affected everyone very much. Everyone in Russia who opposed this war respected the solidarity of the mothers. The surrender of soldiers in the Russian army was one of the most important events that changed the course of this war. In fact, this was a very successful policy of the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian people always tried to help the Russian soldiers who did not want to fight but were forced into the army. Russian soldiers who surrendered were always treated well. Ukraine's leader Zelensky changed the course of the war thanks to his critical decisions. Zelensky, who is an expert in influencing people, managed to influence the whole world in this war. What are your thoughts on the surrender of Russian soldiers? Do you think Russian soldiers will continue to surrender? How does the surrender of Russian soldiers affect the course of the war? Share your opinions with us. Follow us for more updates.